Hi, 8th grade. This is lesson 2 of module 8, draw and analyze trend lines. And the I can statement says, I can draw a trend line and informally assess a trend line by judging the closeness of the data points to the line. So we will work on the build understanding, but if you have not already done the Spark Your Learning, I would encourage you to pause the video here and go back and do that. It'll just give you a really good warm up for this lesson. So I'm going to read number 1, and then I want you to pause and do this on your own, and then we'll go through it together. So number 1 says, a class draws 4 different models or trend lines for the same data set. To evaluate each trend line, consider the following questions. How many points lie above the trend line? How many points lie below? How many points does the trend line touch or pass through? And what is the greatest vertical distance between any point and the trend line? And then over here, you can see that there's vocabulary. So they give you the definition of a trend line. It models the behavior of data displayed in a scatter plot. When a scatter plot shows a positive association, the trend line will have a positive slope, for example, like Model C. Actually, all these have a positive slope. So that shows a positive association. The trend line for data with a negative association will have a negative slope. So pause here, look at these different models and answer these questions that they ask, and then we'll look at them together. All right, so I'm hoping that you took some time and did this on your own. I am going to highlight the questions that we should be considering. So let's look at that. So let's start with, I'm going to do them in different colors. So we first want to think about how many points lie above the trend line. That's important. And then we want to think about how many points lie below. Then we also want to think about how many points does the trend line touch or pass through. And that might make your answers a little bit different from the ones that I give here, but that's okay. And then what is the greatest vertical distance between any point and the trend line? And that could be considered an outlier, so that's something to think about as well. So let's look at what the answers to these might be. Let me get a different point on my pen. Let's try this one. Okay, so let's look at Model A. So how many points lie above the trend line? Well, we can just kind of count each one. 1, 2, 3. So there are 3 above on this one. 3, that's too thick. Points above the trend line. And then we can count the ones below it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this one's touching, but we'll count that 7, 8, 9. So we have 9 points below the trend line. And then if we look at the number of dots or number of points that the line passes through, we have 1, 2, 3. I don't know if this one, yeah, I guess this down here is one also. So 4. It's hard to see because the arrow is on top of it. So there are 4 points. That the line passes through. They also say the word touch, so you could include that in your description. And then the last question, what's the greatest vertical distance? And so you can see this point here is really the farthest away from this trend line. And remember to look at the scale. Each is 2 instead of just 1. So we could say 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Wait, let's do it again. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, and then 15. So the greatest vertical distance is 15. And it's between any point and the trend line, but I don't have enough. Oops. 15. So that's A. So let's look at model B. Remember that all 4 graphs are showing the same data. So you can see these points, they're all the same. It's just the trend line on each graph that's different. So that's always a good thing to remember as we're looking at these. So model B, how many points lie above the trend line? So in B, we can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or you could consider this one touching, and put that in the passes through. So your answer again may be different, but let's just look at the ones that it pass or are really above it and it doesn't pass through or touch. So we would have 6 points above. Sorry, my and then if we look at below, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have 7 points below. The trend line. And then if we're looking at how many points it passes through, we can say 1, 2, 3. So there are 3 that it touches or passes through. Oh, sorry. And then the last one, what is the greatest vertical distance? It looks like this point is the farthest away. This is far also, but this one looks farther. So you have 2, 4, 6, 8 is the vertical distance. So the greatest vertical distance, between the line, trend line, and a point is 8 on this one. So now let's look at model C. Let's look at how many are above. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's 6 above the trend line, 6 points. And how many do we have below? Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This one's below, but it's also touching, so we'll say 5. But you could say 6 also. Let's look at the number that, excuse me, it passes through or touches. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 points. And then let's look at what's the greatest vertical distance. So this one is pretty clearly the greatest vertical distance. So that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Again, about 15 on that one. Oops, vertical. And then let's look at model D. So for model D, I already wrote in the answers just to save time. So in this one, you can see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 above the trend line. And this one is, it's touching. So we'll look at that. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 below the trend line. 5 points that touch or pass through. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they counted this as touching or passing through. It could be above also. And then the last one, the greatest vertical distance, this point is the farthest away from the trend line. So we have 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. 11. So the greatest vertical distance is 11. So this should be helpful to get you going and work on the next, the step it out and the rest of the lesson. And remember, I sometimes forget to say this, but always at the end of each lesson, go back to the I can statement and see if you really can draw a trend line in this case and informally assess a trend line by judging the closeness of the data points to the line. Also, look at the turn and talk and think about which trend line you think is the best model of the relationship and why. So I will see you in lesson 3.